My name is Bill Porteous. I'm a painter and a sculptor, and I'm here today to talk a little bit about the sculpture at the 1515 Douglas building called Contours. And the sculpture is really the product of a long developed relationship between myself, the architect D'Ambrosio, Frank D'Ambrosio, and the Jawel Holding. I'll say in the beginning that I feel I am in a very fortunate position as a Victoria artist to be able to do artworks at this scale that frankly I wouldn't be able to do on my own. So it's really it has been a unique opportunity for me to work with clients who believe in my vision and to work with an architectural firm that believes in my vision in a collaborative way. The idea for this sculpture I called Contours began probably 4 or 5 years ago in a sketchbook. Actually, I pulled out a sketch that I had done in 2009 during a meeting with the client and the architect at an office. And we had actually spent almost a year looking at another idea. But technically and budget-wise, the first idea at the time was undoable. So in the course of this interaction, this meeting, I was asked to build on my initial idea and go down a new path. And again, I think it's rare that you're in a position where clients believe enough in terms of what you're doing that they ask you to keep searching for ideas, keep searching for something that you feel is doable, but also stretches the boundaries of what we have done. So in the course of this meeting, I chose this idea, I showed it to the client, and then the normal way we work is to go from a sketch to a further development of the sketch, the idea, the raw idea. And from the beginning, my idea with this sculpture was something that was kind of inspired, first of all, by many years of life drawing. I call it contours, and if anyone's ever drawn the figure, we know there's amazing dynamic contours in the figure. And also in nature, when I took walks in the woods, I often was fascinated by root forms and quagmires of leaves crossing over each other, blocking or framing views that you would see through that. So I took this idea again that I had sketched out very briefly, quickly in a sketchbook in 2009. Now we're in 2016, and I took that idea and I started to refine it. So the next iteration was actually being given a configuration that had been on basically the plans for this building and this site, the corner of Pandora and Douglas Street. And over the years, I had been involved in what is possible on that corner from the blueprint. And again, that's another unique thing for artists to be able to work with space and aesthetics, purpose, before anything's built. So I was quite familiar with what was being asked of this building and of this site by the clients. And then D'Ambrosio, Frank, had made a beautiful model of a water feature, and I was given this form to work within. So as an artist, I really appreciate limitations and the opportunity to do something that comes from my own aesthetic and my own imagination within those limitations. So that's how I I started developing the idea in the second stage. I had real dimensions. I knew it was coming out of water. I knew it could be a certain height and a certain depth. And then the question was material. What could it be made out of? So I've liked steel. Core 10 is an amazing product that has a real presence, and it has a beautiful patina over time, and it changes depending on the weather. Driving by the sculpture, if you see it in the snow, it looks completely different, of course, but if you see it in the rain, it's slick, it reflects the building, there's all kinds of cool things happening. So I wanted to make a sculpture in conversation with the client that had a presence, and asserted itself, but also could be viewed from almost any direction, including in the building looking down on it. But it's a very prominent corner in Victoria. It's across from City Hall. And so it frames the City Hall if you sit in the restaurant in Sherwood. So it had a lot of very dynamic, very public faces, so to speak. So that was in my mind in developing it. So I developed it further from the initial sketch, made another sketch, used clay and modeled the idea of these I call them gestural arcs, kind of nesting within each other. So I actually drew out a shape that was symmetrical from a plan view looking down with these dynamic gestures moving within them. So from that, I made this model, had a third meeting with the client. They were very enthusiastic about it. So I sat down. Again, I'm in a fortunate position. I can sit down with Frank's office with someone who can use a three-dimensional modeling program. We use Rhino, it's called. And I worked with the young architect and basically sketched out the idea in real dimensions to the point that we could see it in 3D. That program is sophisticated enough that the engineers can make decisions based on those drawings. So that's how we did it. The third or fourth thing, again, that was approved, another level of interaction, and then we engaged a company to fabricate it, because I don't have a studio, and I'd still be making it maybe even if I could. But we found a great company in Burnaby called George III and Sons. They manufactured and formed the sculpture to my drawings. In fact, it was sophisticated or difficult enough that they made a scale model of it, which we then approved. And then they took Core 10 steel, which is about 1.5 inches thick. I think the total weight of the sculpture is 25,000 pounds. The largest arc, which is 23 feet by 10 feet high, weighed 2,500 pounds on its own. So they made it from the engineering drawings. They had a 550-ton drop press to shape it, shipped it over on 2 semi-trucks from Burnaby, and then it was installed by, I think it's Alliance Mechanical. They're a firm in Victoria. And I must say at this time, I'm very fortunate to be able to work with some really skilled people, fabricators, architects, engineers. So really you're seeing the result. It's my vision, but it's made possible by the client, the architect, and the fabricators, right? And again, I feel lucky or fortunate to have these people trust what I'm doing. My only job after I sketched it was to make sure it matched my idea. And again, I'm in a rare position where the client has given me the opportunity to have that say. So I've been involved in the shaping of it. In fact, during the course of the fabrication, the engineers would send me a drawing from our Rhino drawings, the 3D models, and asked if we could move the base of one of the arcs 2 millimeters to the left or to the right? And of course I said yes, because that would have entailed creating more of a superstructure underneath it. And my idea is that if your design has enough integrity, it can handle revision. It can handle modifications to a point. And that's, again, I'm in a position where I can say, okay, up to this point, that's fine. If it goes past this in a sense, line in my mind, I would say no, and then we'd have to readjust. So it's really what you're saying is something that I believe will last. That's the other thing. I'm very interested in work that has an eternal quality, that isn't flashy or makes a great first impression, but then you kind of becomes wallpaper. I'm really much more interested in lasting impressions, for what it's worth. So far, I must say the client, I believe, they can speak for themselves, but I think they're very happy with the sculpture. The feedback has been great from the architectural community, and I believe it does. I think for me, it exceeded what I thought was possible. So really, a combination of many skill sets, as I said before, and I believe it'll stand the test of time. At least that's what I hope. A few thoughts on the nature of the contours piece. I was asked to describe it, to write a little description. And my description basically is 8 gestural arcs intersecting contours which give rise to arches and mirrored and animated by water. That's as close as I got to being a poet, but I think that really addresses what I was engaged with. I knew that the arches would be mirrored in water. And it's an interesting thing for me, in discussions with Frank, the architect, we talked about the idea of that, or the fact that the building exists below ground level. So it was an opportunity to actually express that in a poetic way with the water continuing what is above and reflecting it below. So to me, that was an interesting byproduct of our dialogue. Again, in most of my artistic life, even though my work is abstract, I've always been engaged with the figure, and especially in life drawing, gesture. And if you look at the arcs, they're not simple arcs. They're compound curves, which was, again, a real challenge for the fabricators, but very, very dynamic. So I really was playing with these two ideas of this stable, almost symmetrical form, and within that, these dynamic interactions, much like muscles that move from the back to the front, or from the side to the front, and interact this way. I always tell my life drawing students that there are very few muscle systems that do this. They're doing this. There's this kind of twist. So I think that's reflected in the piece. Also I had this idea, I really wanted these to be kind of radical cantilevered curves. And I found out through experimentation and through dialogue with the fabricators and the engineers that was possible. So beneath, when you look at the sculpture, there's another 2 or 3 feet of those curves that go below the water level. So in order to get that design at water level, we had to design it so that the arcs started lower, which is kind of an interesting thing. So there's, I think, maybe 100 or so 16 by 16 inch squares of granite that have been leveled. It's quite neat to see them do that. But the arcs come through those squares. So all that had to be designed in a sense. So there was a lot of design to support the dynamism, the dynamics of these arcs. The other thing was I didn't really want it to be purely symmetrical, even though it's symmetrical from the top. There's an asymmetry to the interaction of the arcs. But also being able to see it in a model and literally 360 walk around it was a real, something that helped me a lot in how I developed the idea. Making a clay model was really good too. I actually made a clay model of each of the arcs and then put them on a reflective surface so I could see how they interacted, right? And again, that helps the client understand where the idea is going. So the other thing is the interaction of the water and the steel. That steel is very dense, very muscular in a sense. The water is always changing. So even if it was just a bar of steel, you would have a very dynamic, interesting, kind of poetic yin and yang thing going on. So that has, again, in terms of the underlying ideas or experiences that led to this, is really informed by my drawing. It's been informed by my my investigation of how shapes work together through space. And I believe if anyone takes the time to spend time with the sculpture and sit and walk around it, they're going to see something that reflects this dynamism, this quality of life. And I think the space is very inviting. Frank's, the plinths or the bench around it has really been designed for people to sit on and stand on, and we see people doing that. So I think over time, once people discover it, because if you drive by it, it does make an impression, but you can't experience the water. Some people don't even know there's water there because there's 1 inch of water continually flowing over the surface of these squares of granite.